We in the information age, and really what that means, it's oversaturated, like podcasts in the rap scene. It's confusing. Whether you go in live or you zoom and can't be on the same page, till you read what the room thinks, and the room thinks too many words, and every word is personal, and when it's in type, it's even worse. You misunderstood? That's just how it works. So I'm a hypocrite, just like the rest of the earth, and racists think you hate them, so they gotta hate you first. Welcome to the Museum of Dead Words, alongside Kristen Crouch, Andrew J. Scoville, and Pamela Capallet. I'm your tour guide, Dyalekt. We've spent the past few years pouring through conversations online to find words that kill discussions and ruin discourse. We dubbed these words dead and have been infiltrating art galleries, co-working spaces, cafes, even places like the Pyro Bar to see how these words died and why that matters. In the online series, we'll be spending a week with each word, with Blueprints in Progress on Tuesdays, where we get deep into how a word dies. And on Thursdays, today, the main event, which is a collaboration with artists from around the world about their experiences with these words. If you know a word or phrase that may have died or is possibly in danger, please add it to the Dead Word bucket on museumofdeadwords.com. Send me a DM, smoke signal, carrier pigeon, some kind of something. Find me. A little about the museum. We opened when your mouth did, and thanks to the generous contribution of millions of donors like you, we've been able to identify and catalog a growing list of words in the English language that have fallen into disuse. You may wonder why we wrote rhymes for the lines that died. You see, language comes from sound, and communication comes from the drum, so we gotta use rhythm and tone to keep these discussions in check. The reality is that words don't actually mean anything until we give them power by infusing them with tone and cadence. The second word in our museum is racist/racism. It was born in 1928 and died somewhere between 2000 and 2008 when Americans decided that one black president is meant that we've cured our national disease. Like President Bush, we stood awkwardly in front of our flight suits when that mission accomplished banner behind us a little bit too early. As we discussed in Tuesday's Blueprints in Progress, racist and racism are linked by deed, but the soft, the scared, as well as the hateful and duplicitous have conspired to rend them asunder by making it about your feelings. Nowadays, if a racism happens, but no racist can be identified, it's like it never happened, and that's why there is no change. That's one of the biggest things, because, when trees fall in the woods, they still fell. Unlike hypocrite, and contrary to the words of Avenue Q, everybody isn't a little bit racist. That's just what folks who don't do introspection say when you ask them to do a little bit of introspection. We've invited artists of different disciplines to jam with us and create their own impressions. And our next artist hails from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, by way of Rockville, Maryland, excels in mixed media and installation art while working towards a Bachelor of Fine Arts at Carnegie Mellon University. He has held 9 exhibitions, won 5 awards, including the Pittsburgh Foundation Advancing Black Arts Grant, and has partnered with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. Please welcome the work and wisdom of Steve Montinar. Peace. Hey. Welcome, Steve.
What's up?
Thank you so much for being here. So before we get started with anything, I just wanted to bring you on before we share your work. So we got a couple of pieces that we're going to be sharing that is called Browner Than Your Bag. So let's check out these pieces, and then I want to rap to you about you, your work, and what these pieces are and what they mean to you. So let's get going with Browner Than a Bag. Those pieces are dope. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming and rocking with us. Wanted to share the pieces. Browner Than Your Bag. Browner Than Your Bag is a velvet mask and photo triptych commenting on colorism through the imagery influenced by the brown paper bag test. The brown paper bag test was a practice where Black people who were darker than a paper bag were denied certain privileges than those with lighter skin. The test originated from the New Orleans bag parties in the 1850s, where Black hosts would only allow those who passed the test to enter. However, the concept can be traced back to African slavery in the U.S. Plantation owners gave light-skinned slaves the privilege of working in the house rather than doing the hard labor in the fields. This instilling of Black undesirability went from a specified time period to a systemic issue, which led to internal conflict in the Black communities. The concept of the brown paper bag test and the blue vein societies can be found anywhere from job interviews to skin and hair color products. Browner Than Your Bag plays against white elitism by depicting a dark tone paper bag in an appealing high fashion magazine grade photo shoot. It's really dope. That's the statement about the piece. And Stephen, welcome. Thank you for being a part of the Museum of Dead Words. Appreciate you sharing this part because we get to talk about, I passed the paper bag test and definitely in the house type of cat. Although, thanks to COVID, I guess we're all in the house these days.
I wouldn't be, but thank you for approaching me to make this piece. When you told me my word was racism, I more so applied. I applied for the word racism. I wanted to show something that wasn't like people's first, kind of thought about like racist and racism, specifically in America, because that's kind of like the target audience right now, because it's just the circle we reside in. But I wanted to explore a more of a niche and kind of under the radar type of racism, and that's colorism. Colorism is it's shown as it's almost covered as a preference, and people hide it as like an okay form of racism, but it's also like a systematic problem, because for example, in the artist statement you just read of mine, you talked about how like Black folks would create their own societies and create their own acceptances, but all that is stemmed from a white mindset depicting of what is okay in Blackness and what is an appropriate Blackness. So thank you for letting me do this piece, because I feel like it touches on some themes that aren't touched on as much in art.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's something that means a lot to me too. Being light skinned, I know a lot. I've been, told a lot and read a lot about paper bag tests and seen that kind of situation. It's, stuff that I've seen in my own family. Like I try to give grace to like my own aunts and uncles who would give me praise when they didn't give my darker skinned cousins praise. And when I seen situation, it's like the type of thing that when you're in second and third grade, you don't understand why you're asked to be in a gifted class while other people aren't. But it's funny when, you talk about like acceptable Blackness, because there are like a lot of hoops that folks can jump through to be considered acceptable and part of acceptable Blackness. But in the end, it's kind of like none of it is acceptable. There's no type of Blackness. With the same gifted programs that I was in, it was because they didn't know my background and they saw my Jewish last name. And then when my mom came to school, all of a sudden I was not being offered gifted programs and was pushed towards vocational tech.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that term acceptable Blackness, there's two aspects of it. There's fame, the entertainment side, and then there's like the desirable, like exotic preference side of it. And when it comes to the bag I'm doing, it's obviously on one side, but talking about the broad scope of like a lot of Black people are used as entertainment, and the paths for people like me and you to succeed are based off of entertainment, and even art is a form of entertainment. But like people use it as like this billboard to showcase things that they might necessarily experience, but they want to be like a part of the culture. But the other side of it is Blackness for me and you are very different, like due to our skin color. So I think there's going to be experiences also in a different age type of aspect, but in a color aspect, there's different things that people assume because of me that they won't assume because of you and how your makeup. So I think that this topic is something that's more complex than just like racism, because racism is kind of bold. It's kind of not in your face. In times it can be in your face, but other times it's obvious. Like, or you can be like, "Oh, is that racist?" But
Mhm.
then like colorism is like, "Oh no, that's okay." Like people can pass it off as something.
Well, you said this thing about preference, right? And one thing about racism, prejudice, mistreatment of people in general, to like even take it farther than that, those are all preferences. They're just like terrible,
Yeah,
shitty preferences. They're like that. They're not cool as There's like, oh, I like the green M&Ms. That's cool, but like, oh, I don't like the brown people. They're in the same category, but like this, you can't just be like, oh, it's just my preference.
yeah. Once you start taking the M&Ms out of the bag and throwing them out, then there's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, it's a whole next
So
thing. Yeah, so it's I get when people are using the preference, but there are all these words that people use under the umbrella of racism. That I think this is one of the most difficult things about understanding is because racism, you say, is like it feels like this big, huge, and oppressive thing, and it's monstrous and it's big and it's declarative, right? So racism is one of those things where someone is a racist, or if what they're doing is racism, we need a gold stamp on that for anybody to believe that that's a thing. Otherwise, it's just like, well, that's just preference. They're just, they must have seen you out of the corner of their eye, and that's why they were worried. Oh, it's not because you were black; it's because you were young. There's all these other excuses and other words and other phrases that they try to use to mess with us.
yeah,
I
there's like
also,
almost prescribed like guidelines people make, like association. Like I can't be racist because of this, or like it was this time period, or is like my relation to this black person that exists somehow in my life. Like there's always this excuse to have a naivety, and when it comes to racism, and I feel like what you said before about how like racist is like the N word for white people. I think it's funny because like when it comes to terms, and it comes to like basic like degrading terms, nothing will make a white person turn faster on you than calling them a racist. And I think it's funny because when your effect can happen when you're not even there, and how it's like built into the society. For example, black hair. Recently I saw Chris Rock's documentary, I think it's called Good Hair.
oh yeah,
And like how he talks about like relaxers and all this idea of beauty, but they all stem from like white notions of what is beautiful and what is desirable. And going back to like my earlier statement, I think desirability is like the main word that I think that I'm trying to suggest within that imagery. There's something about like skin color that people deem as like ugly. And with ugliness, they also denote criminality to it, like the fugitive image. There's a whole scientific racism aspect of just living, where people are like, oh, you look like this, or like you have this bone structure, and like so you're more prone to violent behavior, you're more prone to these certain negative things, or like we can't trust you automatically.
yeah. I really appreciate what you're saying about desirability, because desirability and beauty, these are things that people like to put also in the like preference category, like, oh, it's just like a whim. And they don't understand how important these things are for society to function. When you're talking about like the science behind these things, I've studied a little bit of behavioral psychology where people who are better looking, when they go to job interviews, or people who are considered better looking, they have the scientific symmetry and all that. They're more likely to get job interview acceptances, not just because the interviewer wants to sleep with them. Sometimes that may be the case, but more because good looking people are people that you trust. And you know this throughout like our art. When you look at a cartoon or something, especially made for kids, the bad guy is usually disfigured or ugly in some kind of way. Our news anchors are usually good looking people, not because we're trying to be horny on the evening news, but because we will trust them because we think that they're good looking. So when you put together these ideas of beauty and trustability, well, if we continue to mark Black people's hair, Black people's skin, Black people's clothing, all of these things as marks of ugliness, we will be able to tie them to things that we don't trust. I mean, I talked a little bit on Tuesday about the etymology of the word fair and how fair, in its oldest interpretation, meant beauty and also meant light skin. They were like kind of around the same time they came together. And I believe it was some old Germanic, I forget the type of German it was at the time, but in an older German, it was farin, which meant light and also meant beautiful, in opposition with the word for ugly, which was brown.
Yeah, and I think that like going back to like just color categories and like color associations, because I haven't looked too far into this specific part, but I think this is a question that you've kind of raised to me that I want to look into is why black and not brown? Like
Mm-hmm.
why was it like an association with black? Because like the color associated with black is all negative stuff like death and things of that nature, and white is associated with purity and heaven. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting how there's the appearance color that could have been chosen, but then there's an also like denotation and a whole description of the color word itself. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an interesting thing. Well, I will also look into an interesting thing to just like put on to somebody by and the association of those words and the connotations of them being attached to a body as well.
Yeah, I mean, that feels very on purpose. People are afraid of the dark. I've long said that the way that the world treats Black people of African descent is a conflation of fear and mistrust of the dark with a mistrust and kind of irrational hatred of Africa. And I've
Mm,
seen, because you'll go to different communities where there's like no African anything, and darker skinned people are still treated worse. There'll be Asian countries where, like, it's just about your skin color. No one has any connection to Africa. And then also, when I see people of African descent, it doesn't necessarily matter their skin color. They're still thought of as lesser. So when you combine those two things, being dark skinned and have that African background, then both in terms of people's instinct and in the way that they've been raised, there's stuff to be afraid of. There's stuff to not trust. It messes with you.
I think instinct is is an interesting topic to include because I think all just like the basis of human life is kind of associated with hierarchy,
Right.
and in every culture, every race, every like group of people, I think tries to establish this type of hierarchy, and the kind of going back to those color associations and how like fair is at the top and then like dark is at the bottom, and how that transcends time, that transcends mindset. But then there's the whole like erotic version of it where like
Mm-hmm.
I it also comes with trend because I more so like recently you see like how black men are fetishized, like
Mm-hmm.
black like tall dark black men are like
Mm-hmm.
fetishized, but like before that it was like light skin, and then before that it was like other races and other genders, and I think racism and more so colorism is almost being passed as a trend
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like possibly maybe eventually that if dynamics shift colorism I also don't believe any like concepts ever go away, but
Mm-hmm.
like I feel as if that the concept of what is colorism will shift into these different lenses and like even color preferences. So I think just the concept of colorism is its own body that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it seems to be this thing that it has sprung out of racial inequity, where people are having their own reactions and their own feelings about stuff. That's the ill thing about it. Is like there's this large systemic stuff that has to do with us but doesn't consult us, and then there's the personal part of it, and then our personal part ends up influencing the larger systemic stuff, especially if we're not paying attention to it. I remember as a kid, who was light skinned and male in the Black community, I would watch media that was like made by Black folks, and I thought that I had a gender problem. I thought that I was supposed to be a girl because the only time you saw Black people of my complexion on TV, they were women. The only time
Mm.
they were men was when they were intentionally mulattoes and they were explicitly characters you couldn't trust. They would always sell you out. They were the Uncle Tom.
Can I
So,
ask you? like what was your like did you feel like a disconnection between you and your blackness, or did you try to embrace that from early on?
So, I'll talk about when I first knew about my blackness. Was when I was a kid, and I think it was like first grade, kindergarten, something like that. And I went to school, and there was a police officer who came to school. I don't know how much we had talked about my identity as a kid at the time, but I went to school, and the policeman talked to me, and we came back, and my mom was like, "So what did the policeman say?" I just heard this story like a couple of years ago. I didn't know about this. And my little behind was like, the policeman told me to don't steal and to call if there's a problem and don't trust black people.
Like for real?
Yeah. So my mom was like, wait, what? Don't trust black people. I'm black. We're black. And I was like, apparently I said, oh, no, we're like caramel. Right. So, okay. And she was like, okay, what about Tammy? You trust Tammy, right? Tammy is my older cousin who named me. My birth name is Brian. She named me Brian after some boy she had liked. My parents couldn't agree on what to name me and all that. I love my big cousin Tammy. I trust her implicitly with everything. And I was like, and she's dark skinned. And I was like, yeah, I trust her. And then she was like, don't listen what these policemen have to say about this because you listen to your family and you're black and we're black. And that was the first time I was made aware of it. Like the times when I was made aware of it was when people from outside would question and or threaten. Because, in your family, you're just in your family. Yeah. And those things about like the media I saw, it didn't make me question my blackness. It just made me question my place in the diaspora.
That's an interesting way to put it. Because I think that kind of ties into like my body of art as a whole. Because when people look at it, it's just about like blackness. They think about like, oh, he's just exploring blackness in America or blackness within himself. But like I've told you, like my work stems from identity. It stems from who am I? So I come from a Haitian household. My mom and dad are Haitian, and I have a older sister and younger brother. But their assimilation into America has kind of caused a disconnect between Haitian culture and my life in America. So like I had a disconnect with Haitian culture because of them trying to assimilate and then ending up kind of distancing from their own culture, or at least distancing us like kids away from our own culture. But then me as like a black person in West Virginia, because I've grown up in West Virginia for like, I don't know, like more than a decade or so. I'm old now, but living in West Virginia, which has like its own issues with racial politics, and me going to school and stuff there, and I knew I was different. I was like, I'm obviously one of the handful of black kids there, but then on top of that, it's just like my view of the world was different, and everybody would let me know, like when they make race jokes and things like that. And my version of assimilation was at least, well, if I'm going to fit in, then let's make people comfortable. Right. And comfortability is an interesting aspect, even though like I was mostly a sheltered kid, so I was like mainly in my home if I'm not at school. So at school is when I was like exposed to different people, different white people, like just a whole palette of like tan. But then like when I would interact with them, I would have to figure out who that person is and then judge myself or my actions based off them. So for example, if they made a race joke, I'd laugh it off and then make a joke about myself as well. And almost like furthering like the dehumanization of me due to my skin color. And like that's before high school. That's like my entirety of say from middle school to high school. So in terms of that, like I was also losing or wanting to lose like this American identity that I was born with. So like I had this disconnect with American culture because I feel like I didn't fit in. But then I also had this disconnect with Haitian culture because I felt like I wasn't learning about it. So when it comes to the time of me choosing like colleges and stuff, I just like went to the farthest place that accepted me. And then I went in for art and I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about? And initially it was like the whole like, oh, it's art. I guess I have to talk about like my like minority identity. But then it kind of shifted as I really started being invested in thinking about it, and I started exploring my identity in the lens of the world around me.
Mm,
And what comes with that is blackness. What that comes with is like my gender, all that stuff, all the things that demographically make up me that people see before they see me.
mhm,
So my work is about blackness, specifically blackness in America, because that is the lens that people use to view me in my work. It doesn't just inherently come from blackness because I'm like, oh, I just want to make black work. It comes from a whole investigation of life and of my life. So I think it's
mhm,
interesting how like we had to go through like these same types of investigation, obviously from very different points.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing about art, and that's also like the thing about blackness. That definitely, I would say white people, but I think other ethnicities
Oh yeah.
don't have the same type of thing where it's like blackness is, regardless of your skin tone or my skin tone, is such a huge facet of your life, whether you're an artist or whether you're a 9 to 5 type of worker, whether you're a young student, that I think other groups don't have as baked into the stuff that we do and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And it's because, like, to a great degree, both of us are saying, on both of our ends, it's because of reaction. It's not like we woke up today and was like, we're trying to black all over everybody.
Yeah.
We are just trying to live our lives and explore our lives, just like everybody should be exploring their life. Every artist is exploring every facet and all these parts of them that matter. And not only is this something that is a big part of our life because of how people treat us, but it's also like blackness in America. 2,000 years from now, when people can really study it with an objective eye, it's going to be fascinating. This concept of this people from an entire continent who, some of them were taken, put into these awful conditions where mental parts of it, physical parts of it still exist to this day, and decided to create a culture in through and despite their oppression, to the point where we can talk about our commonalities, even though phenotypically we don't have a lot going on in common.
I think another thing important to note is performative blackness.
Mm,
Because now like because we both come from a hip hop background, so
mhm,
like just the this I feel like this is like the current view of it, but there's also other historical things I'll go into. But like
yeah.
hip hop culture being like the dominant like subculture right now in like the world, I'd say, not even just America, just in the world, where a black run or dominant rather, a black dominant
Mhm,
genre really makes up everything from the slang to fashion trends to like basically
mhm,
art seen as a whole, even like popular art where you see like artists like Murakami who's made a name in the art world and art market and transfer those skills into like video, like he's doing like I think this video series or cartoon series of Kanye and like Kid Cudi, like
mhm,
and like this and like kind of how this transfers into American culture and how America's built off of just black work,
mhm,
from like trends and fashion to the literal structure of the government, like the arguably things from what is property to how people battled over the Civil War, and that's changed America. But then people don't want to really acknowledge how like if you didn't bring in slavery, that wouldn't have happened. Now this great place you're talking about is like built off of like manufacturing labor of black people. It's not just black people. I think a close marginalized community is also the Hispanic and Latinx community, and like those are two communities that like are always side by side and they're always kind of
mhm,
put down. Uh, but I'm not in terms of slavery. Like it's obviously there's Africans, but I think it's built off of immigrant labor,
mhm,
and it's built off of the ideas and not just the physical work. So when it comes to performativity and like kind of the modern day like minstrel show that happens and how people say, oh, this is just slang, it's not Ives and things like that, and people want to like twist and turn their hair into things or styles that weren't really meant for their hair and that had actual utility purpose and things like that, where like this it's cool to be black without the issues of thinking about harm. And yeah.
Yeah, that's no, I mean, that's so real. I remember when I was a kid because I was like backwards from you. I was born in the States and then I lived in St. Croix in the Caribbean. And I remember when people were like, "You've got this long hair." I used to have like really long hair all down my back. And people were like, "Oh, you should do dreadlocks," and I didn't because I don't appreciate when white folks do it. And I have white friends who've done it, and I get it. And people have their own reasons and journey and all this kind of stuff. But I sat there in the room when my cousins and me and everybody were told. I know they were telling me too, but it meant less for me than them. Don't grow dreadlocks. Don't grow out your hair with braids and cornrows and do all that stuff. No one's going to give you a job. And I know that, and I remember that. And I remember when we would go into like the African store where they have the beautiful garments with all these patterns and colors and all this great stuff. People say, don't dress like that. If you dress like that, people aren't going to give you a job. People aren't going to take you seriously. And that's like the simplest of it. People are even treated worse because of a lot of the cultural stuff that they do. And then when you see white folks go and do it, and they're like, but what? I'm just liking the thing you do. And my thing is like, it's not plaid. I'd be okay if African stuff and black stuff was like plaid, where like everybody wears it, but it also, for your Scottish family who has it as part of their thing, their family plaid, they still get to keep that. And it doesn't feel devalued because no one has told them you can't wear your family plaid when you graduate. I was told, I grew up, I graduated high school in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands and was not allowed to wear my cousin Tammy's kente cloth sash for graduation that she had gave to me because all that stuff.
Yeah, I think the kind of opposite thing due to our hairstyles, which I think is also funny. But like the one thing I hear people telling me is like, "Oh, you should grow an afro. You should grow an afro," and because that's their opinion and that's their idea of a black person, like this big afro, loves rap music, all that stuff. And I love rap music, but like that doesn't play into it, me being black. But like when it comes to hair, they'd always say that, and like no justification, just like, oh, I think you look good. But like first, I probably wouldn't. Second, like it's just there's a limited knowledge of what the black experience is, and when it comes to like culture and language and like dress, like all that is there's all this idea around it. Not just because of what's in the popular, sphere. It's also the inherent, like, oh, this is how black people talk. Like, what people tell me is, you don't sound black. Oh, you're okay. You're not black. One girl told me that, like, she was saying, like, the N-word, and I was like, yo, don't say that. And she was like, but I'm saying with an A. I'm like, okay, what? And she's like, oh, if you say with an A or a UH. This white girl is telling me.
Or a UH? That's new to me.
She's like, you say it for UH or an A, it's friendly. I was like, okay, will you say it to another black person? She's like, no. I was like, why? She's like, because they're scary. I was like, what the fuck? Like, so what makes me okay? Because I think at a certain point, me resigning a lot of, and this is like also an issue with my, assimilation into like the culture around me. Like, because I made people comfortable to the point where they'd say that stuff to me.
Yeah.
It also kind of, to them, it's like, oh, I have a black friend. I have a black friend. I can say these things. I have a black card in this sense. And I think it's interesting how when it comes to community, like there's still that kind of colorism, like type of mentality where it's like, I'm going to pick and choose who are my friends because they'll give me leeway to do these other things, or seem more exotic, or have more of a broader culture.
Like Richard Pryor in The Toy, right? It's like I don't know if you're familiar with this film. It's I haven't seen it in that long, but it was like some rich dude decided to buy a black guy to be a toy for his kid, and it was Richard Pryor. He was going to be that toy. It was one of the mainstream movies he made. I think it was in the 80s. And the whole thing about it is, it's like, black folks are okay if they're a toy or a video game character. The whole thing about you being in an afro, I think about like every video game, fighting game, right, that has the black character, it's a caricature of Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly, the martial artist who most seen in Enter the Dragon. That was like the thing where people were like, oh, black people can do karate.
Yeah.
And then it was just like that guy. It also messes me up how long they hold on to stereotypes. It's like that's from the 70s, and people will still say black people don't sag your pants, don't be wearing those baggy shirts, and you're like, that was a long time ago. It's 2020. We haven't worn baggy. Have you seen the tight clothes rappers wear nowadays?
It's very different. I think that's an interesting point about like the lifetime of a stereotype. You know,
Which is
like
longer than the slang, right? It's like it
it's
lasts
longer than the slang, and it's these depictions that come from like probably like minuscule moments that they blow up and like create a caricature of a person and a body, and then they forever hold on to that. And I think it's also interesting how these caricatures are kind of only held by everyone other than black people, but then they're kind of fed to like they're fed to like I don't want to say older black people within the community, but like the older black folks, they tend to have not the same mentality, but they've been told the same thing so much they try to pass it on to you. Like,
that's
don't
what it
dress
is,
that
right?
way. Yeah, because like when I went to school, my parents, because like also I think it's a little different because my parents, they're not black Americans, but then they're in America, they're just seen as African American regardless of who they are.
Yeah.
But as black people who can at least comprehend what's going on with other black people, they would always have these notions. Like if we went into a grocery store, if we were like grocery shopping or a store or whatever, like it's typical to like try things out, pick something up, check the label, all that stuff. They're like, don't touch anything. Don't ever touch anything. I'd get in trouble for touching stuff. He's like, I told you not to. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't touch anything. And then when I came to school, they'd be like, we couldn't wear like any athletic clothes. They didn't want us to have like sweatpants or like gym shorts or like athletic shirts. And they're like, you have to always look presentable. You always have to look like your best. And that notion of always being your best is, I'd say, inherent in blackness now, where you have to outperform. When it comes to anything from academics to sports, it's always the idea of I have to outperform because I'm going to struggle regardless. And the idea of like I'm going to struggle regardless is daunting. Like growing up with that mentality of, okay, well, I have to do this. Or you also reach the point where we're like, let's say you don't succeed in one aspect, but you're like, I'm going to make it anyway. And then you start involving yourself with the other activities, but then you're going to do the most you can in that activity because you become, security comes in familiarity. And once you familiarize yourself with a community or society or a concept, you just do that thing to your fullest.
I mean, I really feel what you're saying about like the hyper competitiveness that has really gotten into the Black American community. I feel like it's grown very much since the 60s, 70s, Reagan, all of those things. And it's the same old game of wanting us to be the things running around and doing stuff, wanting us to be the toys, wanting us to be the athletes, wanting us to be the entertainers, the arbiters of cool, the thing that is sexy, but the thing that is also safe in its own way. People will talk to you. It's so ill that you had someone be like, I can talk any kind of way to you because you feel safe because you don't talk black enough. And this was not a black person saying it to you. And I can't tell you how many times I've been cornered at a party where white people would ask me everything about black people because they found out I was one, and then be like, well, yeah, it's okay to talk to you because you're not a real black person. And like, you know, we can have these kind of conversations in our own community. Like black people can tell me all kind of stuff and we can talk about it. But I really feel like a white person probably can't tell me that. Well, I guess they can because they do.
Yeah. At a certain point, it becomes an echo chamber because, like, the people who want to listen to you are the people who came with the intention of I want to listen to you, you know? So, like, for example, going back to that conversation, which I was having, like, I was at, like, some point in high school where I'm still trying to learn how I'm going to navigate, you know? So, like, that conversation, it's also, like, I can explain you not to do that. But the more you tell me like, oh no, it's okay because of these, is already you telling me I made up my mind, you know? So like also experiencing that like now, like more independently, like in where I go and stuff, the idea that you have to change like the status quo by being within it and not being outside of it is very important. because like once you're outside of an issue and you're looking at it as like a non-active bystander or an active bystander, I guess, as well, and not being within it, it creates an issue of where that also type of activism is performative.
Yeah.
Like you're only telling the people, or you also just trying to alert Black people like, hey, I'm with you, like you're cool with me, like I love all people, you know. But like repeating that to the same person who hopes that already doesn't progress a cause, you
Yeah.
know. Like solidarity is only good enough when you do an action based off that solidarity, not to just say I'm with you and raise
That's
a
the
Black
thing.
fist or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's the big performative thing, right? Is like, I'm with you. And like, what does it mean to say I'm with you? If you're not actually with me, if you're not physically in the space, if you're not putting something on the line, if you're not putting your skin in the game, that's often what we ask of our like allies, right? To be more than an ally, to come and put your skin in the game. But to just be like, yeah, I feel this and this is bad and I'm not going to go and do things. Like I understand people tapping out. Folks do tap out for times and sometimes really long times. Sometimes you can't even get back in. But once we start denying reality, I don't think that it's healthy. You know, I don't say that he's our president is not my president, even if I didn't vote for him and he's not the one I wanted, because I didn't do enough to stop him. If I really was like, that's not my president, I made that not happen. And so, you know, I'm up in it, so we're going to be up in it. And the thing about the status quo changing, you know, when we don't like the status quo and we don't connect to it, I know I've definitely been there, especially younger me, being like, I don't fit into any of these things. You know, that was my whole, you know, I'm mixed and I got these ideas and this, that, and the next thing. And when you're just out there saying, I don't fit into any of these things, what do you care about? Do you care about being left alone? Do you want to just be a hermit? Do you want to sit there by yourself? Well, if that's the case, then you are going to get by off of the remnants of white supremacy. If you really hate white supremacy, then you have to be in the middle of white supremacy as we catch all the benefits and all the horrible things that come from it.
I have a question for you that you brought up, because you brought up like an age factor as well.
Word.
And I think that at a certain time of your life, and I think that's what you're also experiencing right now with like the George Floyd murder and everything that came after, where there's not a specific group of people, but there's a generation, generational type of action that happens, and it seems like over time it's become more apparent that like younger people tend to have like this rebellious like type of energy when it comes to anything, and like when it's into like good spaces like social causes, it tends to do a lot of movement. But now you, as like who has a lot of time to like either settle from like those feelings, but also is in the same type of activist work, how do you kind of transport yourself from one mindset to the other? Do you see things as more calm when you are now older, or do you kind of have that same type of, oh, I need to change this, I'm going to do whatever I can to change it, or you're like, okay, that happened, let me find out another way to address it?
Yeah, I feel you on that. That's really, thank you. I've addressed that in like my personal and also what I typically see with folks, because I kind of feel like I'm not typical. Everybody's like, oh, I'm all different, right? So I was talking to someone earlier about the great parody film, I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. Keenan Ivory Wayans, a lot of other classic actors. And there was a scene where he went to see the old Black militant, Clarence Williams III, I believe, played him. And he was like now married to a white wife, had his little interracial kids, and was like just chilling, having a family. And he's like, well, I thought you were running up in the government buildings with guns. And he said, yeah, me and the brothers, we did. We went up in the building with guns. We came out with jobs. When we get older, we kind of get faced with one of two things. We can ride the status quo and do okay for ourselves. We're often offered things, especially if we have some kind of privileges, or we can not and see whatever happens to us. For me, it happened in a couple of different ways. I was planning on being a lawyer and was working in a law office, and that law office was the same people who represented the cops who murdered Amadou Diallo. in the early 2000s. I think it was like 2001 or two. See, that's how you know I'm old, because I'm like, I don't even remember which year that was. But they did that, and I immediately quit and was like, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I stopped working that job. I didn't need to quit working that job because, I had to figure some stuff out. But I eventually quit working at that job, and I quit on my path of planning on becoming a lawyer, and leaned for a while. I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but I do want to help people. And then leaned further into the things that I could work in, because I spoke to some of the older Black lawyers at the place, and they said, with your mentality and what you want to do, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to give up and become a big money lawyer and just, do your thing, or you're going to become a public defender who's struggling to get by, who is barely able to do their thing and is generally unhappy. And I was like, none of that seems like it's, going to further the cause that I want to. And I got into the arts more, and I got into education more because I saw a lane there. I saw a place where I could help people. And the thing about me is I've never let go of any of that anger. I'm, if anything, angrier than I was when I was young. It's just that, I was just talking about this too. Anger is an energy. And anger and all these types of energy are things that you can put places. It's good. Well, I love that line was in the Avengers movie. What's his name? Where the Hulk was like, I'm always angry. And I was like, word, I feel that. Because I do have this, what folks call a righteous anger. There are things that are wrong and they upset me, and I want to see them done right, and I want to see them fixed. And I'm going to do what I can. When you're younger, what I can is what's most apparent, because we haven't bumped our heads into the wall enough to be like, no, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. I remember when I was in a theater place and someone was like, I can get you on Broadway in the next week if you just stop rousing rabble here. And I looked and I was like, oh, here's another career path thing. I could stop rousing rabble and get some artistic thing that I want. Or I could continue to rouse rabble because that's dangerous. I think the thing about when we get older is navigating what's dangerous. In the beginning, it's okay to do dangerous things because everything seems dangerous. Nowadays, my idea of dangerous has changed. What's dangerous to me is not giving up on this Broadway gig and having to struggle in my life and maybe never having that type of success. No, what's dangerous to me is, well, when I have a kid, if they just saw me as Mr. Broadway, get up and do whatever you want, whatever the system has asked of me, then they'll do the same thing of him. They'll exploit him, they'll pimp him, and they'll make it so that he doesn't love the world that he lives in when this world is already hard enough. So wherever it goes, because like I said, most of other folks, they'll go in other ways, but your idea of dangerous changes, and you have to adjust accordingly to make sure that you're safe and can do the thing that you're doing, and so that you can continue to create those dangerous vibes that inspire the young folks to come and ride along with the danger.
See, I think that's interesting, your story, because I think just like kind of stepping out of a racial aspect and just like that human mind, I think everybody sees options, but they never see like more than what's already like available to them. So like when it comes to any issue, like, okay, like you dealing with like, say, the problems, like the one you dealt with, like, this environment is not an environment you want to be in. Your option's either to deal with it or get out. I feel like a lot of people just see that. They just see, okay, I'm going to get out or deal with it. But then there's like the other aspect where people don't understand that, or like they understand, but they don't think of it in prior to making a decision, where each decision has like a branch, and all those branches just expand and expand till you get the ultimate decision or choice you want. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people in a status quo. Like there's these two options. One is like, it leads to a bunch of uncertain decisions or too many decisions. And the other one's like, I can deal with it, be upset about it, get along with my life, but at least I know this path is certain, And kind of what we were talking about prior to like this live, of how there's like activist artists. Like with an activist artist, like activism comes before art. Like it feeds into the art. But like a performative artist, like a lot of people like on Instagram who do things for like Black Lives Matter movements, they put the art before activism, or like I'm put as much work out because it will make me seem like I'm for this cause. And when you shift those scales, you shift the performativity, you shift the person, you shift the cause. And it becomes something from global or societal to independent. And it depends on where you want to reside for progress to happen.
No, that's really hard. And the thing about that is, like, I think about with art, like at its most basic, right? There, when you talk about these two types of art, you're more performative and then you're more proactive. It kind of feels like art that is about me versus art that comes through me. I remember, early in my career, it was hard for me to, like, as a rapper, to do all the eyes and talk about myself because I didn't want to make it about me. And, I had to be hip to the idea that things have to come through your lens, but that's all it needs to go to. It can't necessarily just be always about you and what you want. It has to be about the things that you see rather than just looking at you. Not that introspection isn't necessary too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So we've been rapping a while. It's 7:50 now.
Yeah,
So
I
we
didn't
should
even
probably wrap these things up. But I want to pull back this. I want to bring back your piece real quick. Where'd you go?
Gotta fix my posture. Didn't know I was leaning.
Oh, it's okay. No, we lean in. It's all right. And so I really appreciate this beautiful designer bag that we would not paper bag. What is it? Velvet, crushed velvet bag. And I just want to know if there's any other things that you want to say about this piece that's really important for folks to understand as we talk about our journeys, as we talk about the binaries, the decisions that we have to make. What do you want folks to get out of this bag if they don't get anything else?
Oh, that's complicated because I think my work is just a catalyst for conversation. So like in terms of like just the work itself, I think I would say is taking all visual components. It's not just the bag, it's the clothing, it's the background, it's the makeup of it, it's the intentionality of everything, but also like the presence and absence of identity, and all these concepts feeding into each other. And I feel like if you focus on this piece as like just the sculpture, you're losing the rest of it, because not only is it a self-portrait, but it's a photo, it's also a sculpture, it's also fashion, it's all these things, but you have to view all those things kind of simultaneously and then pick them out one by one to actually get it or like connect with it deeper. I think it's easy to just look at the mask as like the focal point and then make assumptions based off of this identity and what is coverage and what is exposure. But in terms of just colorism, I like feeding into like my experiences and my color and those around me who I know who share similar experiences. The everyday struggle to be seen and to be identified, and even more so desire, is is just as much of a want as anything else, you know? Like going through life and always thinking about, am I presenting myself well, or will they accept me, or do I have to do something different to make people comfortable, is a huge part of a Black person's mindset. Like you it's hard to, even if you quote unquote just don't care, like it's hard not to think about those things all the time. And at a certain point you have to make a decision where I'm gonna throw out anybody's notions of what I look like and just be me, or I'm gonna accept them and just deal with it, or I'm going to accept it but find a way to navigate in that space to still be me and still progress what I believe in the way I choose to present myself. And none of those options are easy, you know, but it's something you have to kind of develop at an early age, like questioning if, like the whole Chris Rock thing, like the questioning if you have good hair, to questioning if you look right for this interview, or questioning if the person you're with likes the idea of you rather than your being, you know, like, huh?
Oh yeah, no, I was just
Are you?
I was just saying that's woo.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna chime in, but like, I think all these things, like, and the way I describe it as also like a magazine-esque or magazine grade shoot is also a factor. And what does that mean in terms of presentation? It's like, who do you see on magazines, and who do you see on covers, and who do you see on all these like public platforms? And what does that mean about the body and things like that? There's a lot to unpack, even though it comes from the concept of colorism. But like every idea has its own idea, and there's like this just fruits of thought coming out of them.
Thank you. I'm a little mad at you because you said that you didn't want to spit, but you came here and just dropped all of those bars. That was really dope. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming and being a part of the museum. I appreciate you. I appreciate your art, and I appreciate your poetry.
Thank you. I hope we work again.
Oh, please. Yes, we're going to have to. Thank you, everybody. That's our perspective on racist/ism, a Harrison Bergeron of words, burdened by exceptionalism and covered in doubt. Check in with Kristen on Sunday with her epitaphs, and next week our word will be miscegenation. And if racism is unnatural, then how in my lifetime and my parents' lifetime did we have laws not allowing these mythological races to mix? Check out next time. Oh, if you forget everything else, remember this one thing. You got to preach to the choir so they know what to say.